Hello and welcome back to Everything Boats with Captain Frank Lanier, where we discuss boats and boating, from maintenance and repairs to seamanship and safety, as well as everything in between. This podcast is a companion to my YouTube channel of the same name, so if you like and find it useful, be sure to subscribe and please check out my YouTube channel as well, where you'll find hundreds of informative videos on pretty much every boating topic imaginable. So, the topic of today's podcast, silent but deadly. 3 deadly gases that every boat owner should be aware of. There are a number of potentially dangerous gases on board boat owners should be aware of, even discounted those preceded by, hey, pull my finger. First up, the first deadly gas, gasoline fumes. Gasoline fumes are highly volatile and a leading cause of marine-related explosions and fires. Gasoline fumes are heavier than air and can easily accumulate in a vessel's bilge due to improper refueling or fuel system leaks, where it's only a spark away from causing a fire or explosion. Little known fun fact, liquid gasoline does not burn. It's the vapors emitting from it that form an explosive mixture when combined with oxygen in the proper ratios. So, back to gasoline fumes. Fire is typically viewed as an inevitable result of any gasoline vapor explosion, but that's not always the case. Sometimes the explosions are so powerful and violent that they simply blow out any flames, resulting in catastrophic damage with little or no fire damage. So let's talk a little bit about sources of gasoline vapor. While fuel system leaks due to damaged, degraded, or improperly installed components are an obvious source, gasoline vapor explosions can also be traced to things such as improper fueling techniques and a lack of adequate ventilation. Mistakes during routine maintenance or repair of engines, generators, or fuel systems can also lead to explosions. So how do you know if these gasoline vapors are present? Well, use your nose. Your nose is a marvel of nature, so put it to good use. Always sniff your engine compartment and bilge areas, particularly around fuel tanks, after refueling or any time prior to starting your engine. This, of course, is in addition to running your blowers the prescribed amount of time. As good as your nose is, it can't be everywhere all the time, so consider installing a gasoline vapor or fume detector. Gasoline vapors or fumes are heavier than air and will settle in the lowest area of the bilge or compartment. As such, fume detectors and sensors, which are not waterproof, should be mounted as low as possible in the bilge, but above the normal slosh range of bilge water. Let's talk a little bit about prevention. Routine inspections and maintenance of your engine and fuel systems is the key to preventing fuel leaks. Typical problems I find when surveying include deteriorated fuel lines, loose or corroded hose clamps, cracked fuel system components, corroded fuel tanks, and fuel line damage due to lack of chafe protection. Out-of-sight components such as your fuel tank fill hoses and vents should be routinely accessed and inspected. I've found hose clamps reduced to a rusty paste and fill hoses so cracked and deteriorated they can be pulled apart by your hand. Rubber hose and fuel lines, like everything else, has got a limited lifespan, and while there's no hard and fast rule, probably about 7 to 10 years of age, you want to start replacing these hoses, no matter how they look. This is kind of scary, as I routinely find original fuel lines and hoses, tank fills and stuff on boats constructed in the 70s and 80s. All electrical equipment installed in engine or generator compartments of gasoline-powered engines, your starters, your alternators, pumps, battery chargers, water heaters, must be labeled as being ignition protected. This means that they are non-sparking and safe to use in a potentially explosive environment. The other side of explosion prevention is following established safety procedures when refueling, conducting engine or fuel system repairs, and the like. These include operating the engine compartment blowers for at least 4 minutes and checking the engine compartment bilge for gasoline vapors every time before starting engines and generators. Other precautions for refueling include turning off the engine, not smoking, and securing power to all electrical motors, pumps, and the like by turning off the main battery switch. A gasoline vapor-rich atmosphere can make engine starting difficult. So if your engine doesn't start, don't just simply keep cranking. Investigate and see why it's not starting. Next up, carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide, or CO, is a potentially lethal gas produced when burning any carbon-based fuel, such as gasoline, wood, or propane, or anything that you're using an open flame. CO is colorless, odorless, and tasteless. It also mixes evenly with air, meaning it readily travels throughout a boat's interior spaces. CO enters the body through the lungs and is readily absorbed into the bloodstream, where it displaces the oxygen levels in the body and can lead to carbon monoxide poisoning. Common signs of CO poisoning include headaches, dizziness, weakness, drowsiness, nausea, symptoms that can easily be attributed to seasickness, alcohol consumption, too much sun exposure rather than CO poisoning. Little known fact, although death can occur quickly in a CO-rich environment, exposure to smaller amounts can also be lethal. The effects of CO are cumulative and can build up gradually in a person's bloodstream for hours or even days before reaching critical levels. So let's talk a little bit about the sources of CO. While the most common source of CO is engine exhaust, it can also be produced by any open flame device, such as a gas stove, a heater, or grill. During surveys, I commonly encounter the Darwin Award practice of using camping stoves and heaters on board a boat, despite them being clearly labeled for outdoor use only. Engine and generator exhaust system leaks are also a prime concern. However, even properly operating systems can introduce CO into the vessel under certain conditions. Examples include fumes being drawn down below decks when a vessel is operated with the aft hatches or portholes open. This is known as the station wagon effect. It's a wonder, as kids, we all didn't get killed, in the 80s and 70s or in 62, right, by opening up the back of the station wagon to get some fresh air in, right? All that does is just suck all the exhaust back into the station wagon. And it does the same thing for a boat, too. Other examples would be if your boat is docked or anchored near another vessel that's operating its engine or generator. Factors such as inadequate or obstructed ventilation systems can also contribute to CO buildup. As far as detection, how do you know if you have CO intrusion into the vessel? Carbon monoxide is a colorless, tasteless, and odorless gas. That being the case, the only reliable way to detect it is by installing a CO detector. Marine grade CO detectors are recommended for all boats with enclosed accommodation compartments per ABYC standard A-24 and NFPA 302. ABYC also requires that CO detectors be tested to UL 2034 standards. If you utilize a generator to power your air conditioners or other appliances while underway or at anchor, I'd also recommend a CO alarm system that's designed to shut down the generator once CO is detected. Neither ABYC, American Boat and Yacht Council, just to clarify, or NFPA, the National Fire Prevention Association, states specifically where your CO detector should be located in your vessel, other than to say they must be located to monitor the atmosphere in the main cabin and each sleeping area. Unlike LPG or gasoline vapors, which are heavier than air, CO has roughly the same weight as oxygen, meaning detector placement is not limited to high or low areas of the cabin. Mounting them at roughly eye level means it's easier to monitor the detector meters or warning lights. CO detectors also have a limited lifespan, which means that your detectors or sensors as part of a system will typically need to be replaced every 5 years. However, this varies between units, and you should verify that with the instructions provided by your manufacturer. The key takeaway here is that, if you've got a boat that's 20 years old or whatever, and you have CO detectors that are original, they're very likely need to be replaced due to age. But again, you want to verify this with the manufacturer of the unit that you're talking about. As far as prevention, ensure adequate ventilation exists when open flame devices such as stoves and stuff, and never use stoves for comfort heating. Regularly inspect your engines and generator exhaust systems for corrosion, raw water cooling leaks, deteriorated hoses, loose clamps, and so on. Inspect your exhaust system hoses along their entire length, paying attention to hose clamps, blockages, and chafe. Machinery spaces should also be sealed and vapor-proof from the vessel's interior. Our third dangerous gas, liquid propane. So there are a number of reasons why liquid propane gas, or LPG, is a popular choice for cooking and heating on boats. It's efficient, it's relatively cheap, and it's widely available. It can also be extremely dangerous. LPG vapor is heavier than air and tends to flow like water, seeking the lowest possible point. As a boat's hull is essentially a watertight envelope, escaping LPG can become trapped in the bilges. In other words, it flows down into the lowest part of the boat, which is going to be your bilges, where it can rapidly accumulate to explosive concentrations. A little known fact about LPG gas, LPG suppliers are required by law to add an odorant to make gas leaks more noticeable. However, just because you can't smell it doesn't mean that it isn't there, as the gas can remain a long time in your bilge after the odor has dissipated. Sources of LPG leaks. Installation standards and recommendations for LPG systems, such as those provided by ABYC, are comprehensive and, when heeded, go a long way towards preventing the uncontrolled combustion event that we dislike to see on boats. Assuming proper installation and barring any physical damage to LPG system components, the most common sources of leaks will be loose fittings and connections. Other possible sources include improper LPG tank stowage, which can introduce gas into the vessel's interior should a leak occur, deteriorated flexible hose, and damage to LPG lines due to lack of chafe protection. Physical damage to system components can also occur when LPG tank stowage lockers are used for general stowage. In other words, your LPG tank lockers must be dedicated, meaning no other items, tools, lines, shackles, anchors, dog toys, whatever. I've seen them all in there. You can't store these things inside your LPG storage locker. And the reason being is because if you store something in there, it can bang around and damage the system or the components and create a leak. And that's why the locker has to be dedicated, meaning nothing else stored in there. And that includes the little LPG bottles you may use for your grill, because those things are I'll see a lot of boaters just throw those things in there. Well, it's LPG and that's the locker. It should be safe in there. Well, it's not, because those things bounce around and can cause damage as well. Now let's talk a little bit about detection of LPG leaks. In addition to your nose, an LPG detector or sniffer is an excellent means of detecting leaks. Some sniffers consist of a single unit containing the sensor and alarm circuitry. However, most are sold as a control package, which includes a monitor, control panel, remote sensors, 1, 2, or more, depending on the unit and the system you buy, and a remote-controlled solenoid on-off valve to be installed at the tank. Sniffers are designed to constantly monitor the air for LPG gas and should be configured to do so, even with no one on board. And by that, I mean that the sniffer system should be active and powered up, regardless of whether you're on board the boat or not. This ensures that if you return to the boat, you're alerted to a leak prior to boarding and potentially turning on potential spark-inducing piece of equipment. For those who leave their vessels unattended for long periods of time, you should look into sniffer units that provide an option to trigger an external alarm, such as a loud horn or a marine strobe light, to alert marina personnel or passersby that there's a potential problem. As LPG vapor is heavier than air, sensors should be located beside and below appliances, under stoves, for example, and other low areas of the cabin or bilge where fumes are likely to collect. Your LPG sensors are not waterproof, so when you mount them in the bilge, they need to be located as low as possible, but in a location where they're not submerged or subject to bilge water splash. Prevention-wise, check your LPG system weekly for leaks by conducting a leak down test. And I tell everybody that when I survey a boat, I tell them, okay, so you look at your system, you should have a LPG gauge in your system. And the purpose of that LPG gauge is not to tell you how much fuel you got, although it will do that. The purpose of that LPG gauge is to allow you to be able to easily conduct a leak down test. In other words, to check your system for leaks. And how do you conduct that? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I'm going to tell you. With the stove or appliance valves off and the solenoid, if you have one in your system, in the on position, open the manual cylinder supply valve to charge the system. Then close that valve and note the pressure reading. Be sure that you keep the solenoid on, because if you close the solenoid when you close the valve on the tank, now you're only checking the section between the tank and the pressure gauge. So you want the electric solenoid, if you have one in your system, have it on and have the tank valve on. And you've energized the whole system, and now you just shut off the valve at the tank, the manual shut off at the tank. Then you note the pressure. This pressure should remain constant for not less than 3 minutes. A drop in pressure indicates a potential leak, meaning the system must be checked. And you typically do that with leak detection fluid or a solution of non-ammonia soapy water. You don't want to use ammonia because it can attack the brass fittings and such for the LPG system connections. And for God's sake, unless you want top billing in the Darwin Awards website, don't use a flame like a lighter or something to check for leaks. Don't laugh. I've seen people do it. So once you find the leak, of course, then you got to correct it before you can use the system. Although LPG systems and alarms should be professionally tested annually, you can also test them by using a butane lighter. Simply hold the lighter next to the sensor and press the trigger without lighting it, and this should cause your sensor to alarm. So LPG systems are a particular passion of mine, inspecting them, by the way, because they're one of the few systems on board that can usher you into eternity, via a fiery blast and ball of flame. For more information on how to inspect your LPG systems, please check out my podcast, episode 46 from season 1. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. And if so, and you want to buy Captain Frank a cup of coffee, please click on the support link in the text description below. All monies received, not spent on coffee, will go towards making even more awesome podcasts for my channel. And as always, thank you for your support.